Some people are born to lead. Others are born to clean. The laughter came quickly, sharp and effortless, rolling across the glass-walled conference hall like a wave that everyone was too afraid not to join. No one questioned the remark. No one dared. After all, the woman who had spoken those words was Claire Kensington, the celebrated CEO of Kensington Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America. At 38, she had built a reputation for brilliance, discipline, and results. Investors admired her. Business magazines praised her. Employees respected her. Or at least they pretended to. Standing near the back of the room, holding a mop and a small yellow caution sign, Ethan Walker simply lowered his eyes and continued walking. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't even react. The quarterly shareholders' meeting had just ended, and hundreds of employees were filing out of the auditorium beneath bright LED lights that reflected off polished marble floors. The scent of expensive coffee lingered in the air. Designer suits brushed past leather chairs. Conversations about market forecasts and stock performance echoed beneath the high ceilings. Ethan moved quietly among them, collecting discarded paper cups and empty water bottles. To most people, he was invisible. Just another janitor. Just another middle-aged man pushing a cleaning cart through hallways filled with people who rarely looked twice. Claire watched him for a moment as she gathered her notes. There was something about his calmness that annoyed her. Most people who were embarrassed showed it. Most people who were mocked reacted somehow. Ethan Walker simply nodded politely whenever someone spoke to him and returned to work, as if their opinions carried no weight at all. You know, one executive joked as he adjusted his tie. I don't think he even heard you. More laughter followed. Claire smirked. Trust me, she replied. He heard. Ethan bent down and picked up a coffee cup that had rolled beneath a chair. His movements were steady, unhurried. The fluorescent lights reflected softly across strands of gray beginning to appear near his temples. His uniform was clean but worn. His work shoes had seen better years. Yet there was something unusual about him. Something difficult to define. A quiet dignity. The kind that couldn't be purchased or taught. Across the room, a young intern accidentally dropped a stack of presentation folders. Papers scattered across the floor. Several executives glanced over and immediately looked away. Ethan set down his cleaning supplies without hesitation. I've got it, he said gently. Within seconds, he was helping gather the papers while the nervous intern apologized repeatedly. Thank you, sir, the young man said. Ethan smiled. Everyone needs a little help sometimes. Claire noticed the exchange from a distance. For reasons she couldn't explain, it irritated her even more. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, late afternoon sunlight painted the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and silver. Inside, employees continued discussing acquisitions, projections, and growth strategies worth billions of dollars. Yet none of them noticed what Ethan noticed. On a whiteboard near the front of the room, partially erased beneath layers of marker ink, sat a problem that Kensington Dynamics senior leadership team had spent 3 weeks trying to solve. Charts, numbers, forecast models, failed assumptions. The company's brightest minds had debated it endlessly. Ethan paused as he pushed his cart past the board. His eyes lingered for only a moment. Then something unexpected happened. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not the smile of a janitor staring at a board he couldn't understand. The smile of someone who already knew the answer. Ethan Walker lived 23 miles west of downtown Chicago in a modest 2-bedroom house, tucked along a quiet street, where most neighbors knew each other by name. By 6 o'clock that evening, the noise of boardrooms and corporate ambition had been replaced by the soft hum of a dishwasher and the scent of tomato soup warming on the stove. The man who spent his days pushing a cleaning cart through one of the most powerful companies in the country now stood at a kitchen counter, helping his 11-year-old daughter with her math homework. Lily Walker sat at the table, her blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail, a pencil balanced behind one ear. She frowned at a page covered in equations. I think my teacher made a mistake, she said. Ethan glanced at the worksheet and smiled. Or maybe your teacher is hoping you discover something. Lily narrowed her eyes. That sounds like a dad answer. Ethan laughed quietly. It probably is. Within seconds he had solved the problem, but instead of giving her the answer, he gently guided her through the logic until her eyes lit up. Oh, she whispered. That actually makes sense. Ethan nodded. Most things do once you understand how they fit together. Later that night, after Lily had gone upstairs to finish reading a library book, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table beneath a warm overhead light. Outside, a light rain tapped against the windows. The neighborhood had grown quiet. He opened a worn leather notebook and began writing. Numbers, equations, market models, predictive systems. Entire pages filled with ideas that would have looked more at home inside a university research lab than a small suburban kitchen. Yet there was no audience, no applause, no recognition, only silence. Ethan seemed perfectly content with that. The next morning he arrived at Kensington Dynamics before sunrise. The city skyline was still wrapped in shades of blue and gray as security guards greeted him by name. "Morning, Ethan." "Morning, Frank." The cleaning cart rolled softly across polished floors. Most employees would not arrive for another 2 hours. Ethan preferred it that way. He liked the quiet. He liked the stillness before ambition filled the building. As he reached the executive floor, his eyes drifted toward the conference room from the day before. The whiteboard still stood there. The complicated forecasting model remained untouched. He stopped for a moment. Just a moment. Then he picked up a marker resting on the tray beneath the board. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Rain streaked the windows, overlooking the city. Ethan studied the equations. His expression remained calm. He erased 3 small sections, added 4 new lines, adjusted a projection formula, drew a single connecting arrow. Less than 60 seconds later, he returned the marker exactly where he had found it. To anyone else, the changes appeared insignificant, almost invisible. Ethan resumed, pushing his cart, and disappeared down the hallway. 3 hours later, the executive strategy team entered the conference room. Conversations filled the air. Coffee cups steamed. Laptops opened. Then suddenly, everything stopped. One by one, senior analysts turned toward the whiteboard. A silence settled across the room. Someone frowned. Another stepped closer. Claire Kensington entered moments later and immediately noticed something unusual. The room was quiet. Not confused. Not distracted. Quiet. The kind of quiet that appears when people encounter something they cannot explain. And for the first time in weeks, the impossible problem staring back at them suddenly looked solvable. Claire Kensington slowly approached the whiteboard while the rest of the executive team remained frozen around the conference table. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass windows behind her, gray clouds hanging low above Lake Michigan. For several seconds nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound was the faint hum of air conditioning flowing through the executive floor. Claire narrowed her eyes. "Who changed this?" she asked. No one answered. Senior analysts exchanged confused looks. One of them stepped closer to the board and adjusted his glasses. "This cannot be right," he murmured. Another analyst opened his laptop and began entering the revised numbers. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Then suddenly he stopped. His eyes widened. "Wait." The room turned toward him. "Run it again," another executive said. He did. The result remained the same. A third analyst tested the model independently. Then a fourth. The silence grew heavier with every passing minute. Finally, the youngest member of the team looked up from her screen. "The projection error disappears," she whispered. "Every single weakness in the model disappears." Claire crossed her arms. "That is impossible." "That is what I thought too," the analyst replied. But whoever made these changes solved the forecasting. Conflict. Nobody celebrated. The discovery felt too strange. Too sudden. For 3 weeks the company's brightest minds had argued over the problem. Consultants had been hired. Specialists had reviewed the data. Entire departments had devoted hundreds of hours to finding a solution. Yet someone had apparently fixed it in less than a minute. Claire stepped closer to the board. The changes themselves were almost laughably small. A few erased assumptions. A revised variable. One connecting arrow linking 2 data streams no one else had thought to connect. Elegant. Efficient. Almost beautiful. She felt something unfamiliar. Curiosity. "Check the security footage," she said. "I want to know exactly who entered this room." Across the building, Ethan Walker was replacing trash liners on the 22nd floor. Sunlight had finally broken through the clouds, casting warm reflections across polished office windows. He worked quietly, greeting employees with the same polite smile he offered everyone. Most barely noticed him. A young marketing assistant carrying too many folders nearly dropped them in the hallway. Ethan reached out and steadied the stack. "Careful there." "Thank you, Ethan." "You are welcome." Then he continued on his way. By lunchtime, rumors had spread through Kensington Dynamics. Someone had solved the impossible model. Nobody knew who. Employees debated theories in break rooms and elevators. Some suspected a consultant. Others believed it was one of Claire's senior executives. A few joked that maybe a mysterious genius had snuck into the building overnight. Meanwhile, Claire sat alone in her office reviewing security footage. Hour after hour, she watched employees enter and leave the conference room. Analysts, managers, executives, interns. Then, shortly before 7 in the morning, a familiar figure appeared on the screen. A janitor pushing a cleaning cart. Claire leaned forward. Ethan paused beside the whiteboard, picked up a marker, made several quick changes, returned the marker, then quietly walked away. Claire stared at the screen. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she pressed rewind and watched it again. And again, the same janitor she had mocked in front of hundreds of employees had somehow solved a problem her entire executive team could not solve. But what unsettled her most was not what he had written. It was how casually he had done it. As though the answer had been obvious all along. Claire Kensington did not mention the security footage to anyone. Not yet. For the next several days, she carried the discovery like a secret she could not quite understand. Every time she passed Ethan Walker in the hallway, she found herself looking twice. The same janitor pushed the same cleaning cart. The same worn work shoes moved quietly across the polished floors. Nothing about him appeared extraordinary, yet the numbers on that whiteboard refused to leave her mind. On Tuesday morning, she arrived early and deliberately walked through the executive conference room before the rest of the staff. The forecasting model had already been updated based on Ethan's revisions. Analysts were celebrating. Managers were optimistic. The atmosphere felt lighter than it had in weeks. Claire stood alone beside the window overlooking the city and stared at the board. Whoever Ethan Walker really was, he had saved the company hundreds of hours of wasted effort. Later that afternoon, another strange thing happened. A software engineering team became stuck during a product review. An algorithm responsible for customer behavior predictions was producing inconsistent results. Meetings dragged on. Discussions went nowhere. Frustration spread through the department. Around 5 o'clock, one exhausted engineer stepped out to grab coffee. When the team returned the next morning, a small sticky note had been attached to a monitor. It contained only 3 lines of handwriting. 3 simple suggestions. The engineers tested them. Within 20 minutes, the problem disappeared. Nobody knew where the note had come from. 2 days later, a financial analyst discovered a mistake in a quarterly reporting formula moments before a major presentation. The correction arrived anonymously through an internal message. Accurate, precise, helpful. Again, nobody knew who had sent it. The stories began multiplying. Small fixes, quiet solutions, problems solved before they became disasters. It was as if an invisible advisor was walking through the building after everyone else had gone home. Claire started paying attention. She noticed things she had never noticed before. Ethan occasionally sat alone during lunch breaks reading books that seemed completely out of place for a janitor. Advanced mathematics, economics, machine learning. Sometimes employees approached him with random questions. He always answered politely, never showing off, never drawing attention to himself. One afternoon, Claire paused outside a break room and overheard a conversation. "How did you know that?" a young programmer asked. Ethan shrugged. "I read about it years ago. You should work in engineering." Ethan smiled softly. "I am happy where I am." The programmer laughed. Ethan did not. That answer lingered in Claire's mind long after the conversation ended. The more she observed him, the stranger everything became. He never sought recognition, never took credit, never corrected people when they underestimated him. Most people spent their lives trying to prove their worth. Ethan seemed completely uninterested in proving anything. Then came Friday morning. Claire arrived before sunrise and stepped into the lobby. The building was quiet. Golden light from the rising sun spilled through the glass entrance. Near a seating area, she spotted Ethan helping an elderly maintenance worker repair a broken supply cart. No audience, no praise, no reward. Just kindness offered without hesitation. The older man thanked him repeatedly. Ethan simply smiled and returned to work. Claire stood motionless for several seconds. For the first time, she began questioning something deeper than his intelligence. She began questioning her own assumptions. Because the more she watched Ethan Walker, the less he resembled the janitor she thought she knew. and the more he resembled someone who had deliberately chosen a life nobody else could understand. The crisis arrived on a cold Monday morning without warning. At 7:32, phones began ringing across Kensington Dynamics. By 8 o'clock, entire departments were scrambling. By 9, panic had reached the executive floor. Claire Kensington stood at the head of a conference table surrounded by senior leaders whose faces had gone pale. On the giant screen at the front of the room, a single message remained frozen. Horizon Retail Group, the company's largest client and nearly 20% of annual revenue, had announced plans to terminate their partnership. The room fell silent. Nobody needed to explain what that meant. If the deal collapsed, investors would react. Stock prices would fall. Expansion projects would freeze. Hundreds of employees could face uncertainty. Claire took a slow breath. Tell me this is a misunderstanding. The chief financial officer shook his head. Their board voted last night. Another executive opened a report. They believe our predictive platform will not meet future demand projections. The words landed heavily. For months, Kensington Dynamics had been building its future around that relationship. Now everything seemed to be unraveling. Outside the conference room, the building looked normal. Employees drank coffee. Elevators moved between floors. Conversations drifted through hallways. But inside the executive suite, tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Hour after hour, teams searched for solutions. Analysts reviewed data. Engineers revised projections. Consultants joined emergency video calls. Every proposal generated new problems. Every answer created more questions. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion had settled over the entire leadership team. Claire stared out the window toward the Chicago skyline. Gray clouds rolled across the horizon. For the first time in years, she felt uncertain. Not about a decision. About the future itself. Meanwhile, on the 23rd floor, Ethan Walker quietly emptied recycling bins and replaced supply inventory. He noticed the atmosphere immediately. Employees who normally joked with one another walked quickly through hallways. Managers spoke in hushed voices. Even receptionists seemed anxious. Around 4 o'clock, Ethan passed a break room where several employees were discussing rumors. If Horizon leaves, we are in trouble. Nobody has a solution. The executives have been locked in meetings. All day, Ethan listened for a moment, but said nothing. Later that evening, after most employees had gone home, lights still glowed inside the executive conference room. Claire remained seated at the table with dark circles beneath her eyes. Reports covered every available surface. Financial projections filled screens. Yet the answer remained out of reach. Through the glass wall, Ethan could see the frustration written across every face. He pushed his cleaning cart past the room and continued down the hallway. Then he stopped. Slowly he looked back. The discussion inside had reached another dead end. Voices faded into silence. People stared at numbers that refused to cooperate. For several seconds, Ethan stood motionless. The fluorescent lights reflected softly across the polished floor. Somewhere deep inside the building, an elevator bell chimed. Then a faint expression crossed Ethan's face. Not concern, not fear. Recognition, as if he had seen this exact problem before. And as he quietly resumed walking toward the conference room, destiny took its first step toward changing everything. The executive conference room had grown unusually quiet. Hours of discussion had drained the energy from everyone inside. Empty coffee cups sat scattered across the long table. Computer screens glowed against tired faces. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline shimmered beneath the fading light of evening. Claire Kensington rubbed her temples and stared at yet another report that offered no real solution. There has to be something we are missing, she said. Nobody answered. The chief financial officer looked defeated. Senior analysts avoided eye contact. The pressure hanging over the room felt almost physical. At that moment, the conference room door opened softly. Ethan Walker stepped inside, pushing his cleaning cart. No one paid attention. They were too focused on the crisis unfolding around them. Ethan moved quietly between chairs, collecting trash and replacing recycling liners. His presence blended into the background exactly as it always had. One executive continued speaking. Another interrupted. A third dismissed the suggestion. The discussion circled endlessly without progress. Ethan listened while wiping down a side table. Then he heard something. A number. A projection assumption. A market behavior estimate. His eyes shifted toward the presentation screen. He remained silent. Another executive spoke. If Horizon leaves, there is no path forward. There is no path forward using those assumptions, Ethan said quietly. The room froze. For several seconds, nobody reacted. Claire slowly turned toward him. Excuse me. Ethan looked almost surprised he had spoken aloud. I apologize. He glanced toward the screen. I only meant the assumptions are creating the problem. A few executives exchanged annoyed looks. One leaned back in his chair. The assumptions were developed by experts. Ethan nodded respectfully. I understand. Then perhaps leave forecasting to the people trained for it. Another executive replied. Ethan lowered his eyes. Of course. He turned to continue cleaning. But Claire did not look away. Something about his calmness stopped her. Wait. The room fell silent again. Ethan paused beside the cleaning cart. Claire stood slowly. If the assumptions are wrong, explain why. Several executives looked shocked. Ethan appeared uncomfortable. Not nervous. Simply reluctant. It is not my place. I am making it your place, Claire said. The room became completely still. Ethan looked at the presentation screen, then at the spreadsheets covering the conference table. Finally, he spoke. You are predicting customer demand using isolated purchasing behavior. Horizon stopped evaluating customers individually almost 18 months ago. They evaluate regional behavior clusters now. The chief analyst frowned. How would you know that? Ethan ignored the question. Your model assumes individual retention drives future growth. Horizon shifted to community retention metrics. That is why every projection appears unstable. He walked toward the screen. Nobody stopped him. Ethan picked up a marker. The fluorescent lights reflected softly against the whiteboard as he drew several simple lines. A few arrows. 3 revised variables. Nothing dramatic. Nothing complicated. Then he stepped back. Silence followed. 1. Analyst opened his laptop. Another ran calculations. A third checked the market data. The room remained motionless except for the sound of keyboards clicking. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. Finally, the chief analyst slowly removed his glasses. That cannot be right. He ran the numbers again. The result remained unchanged. Another analyst tested the model independently. The same answer appeared. The chief financial officer stared at the screen. This recovers nearly 80% of the projected loss. Nobody spoke. Claire looked from the numbers to Ethan. The janitor who had entered the room carrying trash bags had just solved a problem that millions of dollars in consultants could not solve. Ethan quietly placed the marker back on the tray. I hope it helps, he said. Then he reached for his cleaning cart. But this time, as he turned toward the door, nobody in the room saw a janitor leaving. They saw a mystery they could no longer ignore. After Ethan Walker left the conference room, nobody spoke for several seconds. The executives remained frozen around the table, staring at the revised projections glowing on their screens. Numbers that had looked hopeless less than an hour earlier now pointed toward recovery. The silence felt different this time. Not fearful, not confused, respectful. Claire Kensington stood motionless near the whiteboard, her eyes fixed on the door through which Ethan had disappeared. One question echoed through her mind. Who was he? The following morning she arrived earlier than usual. The city was still waking up as pale sunlight spilled across the streets below. Claire sat alone inside her office and opened a private investigation file. She felt almost guilty doing it. Yet curiosity had become impossible to ignore. She began with employment records. What she found made no sense. Ethan Walker had joined Kensington Dynamics 5 years earlier as a janitor. Before that there were gaps. Large gaps. Missing years. Missing details. Missing explanations. The file felt incomplete, as though entire chapters of a life had been removed. Claire continued searching. Academic databases. Patent records. Archived technology journals. Then suddenly, she found something. Ethan Walker. A photograph appeared on her screen. Younger. Cleaner cut. Wearing a suit. Standing beside a group of researchers at a national technology conference nearly 15 years earlier. Claire leaned forward. Her heartbeat quickened. She opened another article. Then another. And another. The pieces began connecting. Ethan had graduated from one of the most prestigious engineering programs in the country before the age of 20. By 26, he had co-founded a predictive analytics company whose software transformed supply chain forecasting across multiple industries. By 31, he held several patents connected to artificial intelligence modeling. The same kinds of systems Kensington Dynamics, now spent millions trying to develop. Claire stared at the screen in disbelief. The quiet janitor pushing a cleaning cart through her hallways had once been one of the most respected minds in his field. She kept reading. Interviews described Ethan as brilliant but unusually humble. Investors praised his leadership. Universities invited him to speak. Business magazines predicted he would become one of the next great innovators in America. Then the articles stopped. Completely. No scandals. No bankruptcies. No public failures. Just silence. As though he had stepped away from the world overnight. Claire opened one final record. It was not a business article. It was an obituary. Her expression softened immediately. Emily Walker. Loving wife. Beloved mother. Gone far too soon. Claire slowly leaned back in her chair. For the first time, the mystery began making sense. The missing years. The abandoned career. The refusal to seek attention. The quiet life. None of it came from failure. It came from loss. Across town, Ethan sat in the front row of a middle school auditorium watching Lily perform in a student science presentation. His eyes carried the same warmth they always did whenever he looked at his daughter. When her project received recognition, he applauded louder than anyone else. In that moment, he looked nothing like the genius described in old articles. He looked like a father. Just a father. And as Claire stared at the obituary still, glowing on her screen, she realized something that left her heart unexpectedly heavy. The most impressive thing about Ethan Walker was no longer his intelligence. It was everything he had quietly given up without ever becoming bitter. The days that followed changed something inside Claire Kensington. She still led meetings, still negotiated contracts, still made decisions that moved millions of dollars. But now she saw the building differently. She began noticing things that had always been there, but had somehow remained invisible. One evening, she stayed late reviewing reports when she noticed Ethan helping a young receptionist whose computer had crashed before an important presentation. Within minutes, he calmly guided her through the problem. He never mentioned his background, never hinted at his expertise. He simply smiled when she thanked him and returned to his work. Another morning, Claire watched through a glass wall as Ethan carried boxes for an elderly employee recovering from knee surgery. He refused assistance, refused recognition. He acted as though kindness were simply part of the job. The more Claire observed, the more uncomfortable she became. Not because of who Ethan was, because of who she had been. One afternoon, she opened archived security footage from previous months. She watched Ethan helping interns find meeting rooms, helping security staff solve scheduling issues, helping engineers troubleshoot software problems when nobody else was available. Again and again, the same pattern appeared. Quiet service, quiet wisdom, quiet dignity. And every time he solved a problem, he disappeared before anyone could praise him. Claire closed her laptop and stared out the window of her office. Below her, Chicago moved through another busy afternoon. Yellow taxis flowed through intersections. People hurried along sidewalks. The city never stopped moving. Yet for the first time in years, Claire found herself standing completely still. She remembered the day she had mocked him in front of hundreds of employees. She remembered the laughter, the careless remark, the confidence with which she had judged a man she never truly saw. The memory stung. Later that week, she walked through the employee cafeteria and noticed Ethan sitting alone near a window during lunch. A mathematics journal rested beside his tray. Sunlight reflected softly across the pages. For a moment, she considered walking over, apologizing, saying something. Instead, she watched from a distance. At the next table, two young employees approached Ethan carrying a difficult project proposal. Claire could not hear every word, but she saw what happened next. Ethan listened patiently, asked thoughtful questions, offered a few suggestions. Within minutes, the employees were smiling, hopeful, encouraged. When they left, Ethan returned to his lunch as if nothing unusual had happened. Claire felt a strange heaviness settle in her chest. All her life, she had believed leadership came from intelligence, authority, and achievement. Ethan possessed all three, yet he never used them to elevate himself. He used them to lift other people. That realization followed her home that night. It followed her through meetings, through conference calls, through sleepless hours staring at the ceiling. And slowly a truth she had spent years ignoring became impossible to escape. The strongest person inside Kensington Dynamics had never been sitting in the executive suite. He had been quietly walking its hallways all along. And the woman who once believed she understood success was beginning to understand humility for the very first time. 3 weeks later, the atmosphere inside Kensington Dynamics felt completely different. Horizon Retail Group had not only remained a client, but had expanded its partnership after reviewing the revised projections and strategic recommendations. Investors regained confidence. New opportunities appeared. The crisis that once threatened the company had quietly transformed into one of its strongest seasons. Yet for Claire Kensington, the most important change had nothing to do with revenue or contracts. On a bright Friday morning, she sent a company-wide message requesting every employee gather in the main auditorium. Hundreds filled the room. Engineers, analysts, receptionists, security officers, maintenance crews, interns, managers. The same hall where laughter had once echoed now hummed with curiosity. Ethan Walker stood near the back holding a supply clipboard, expecting nothing unusual. Claire stepped onto the stage. For a moment, she simply looked across the crowd. Then she took a slow breath. Today is not about quarterly performance, she said. It is about character. The room grew quiet. Claire continued. A few months ago, I made a serious mistake. I judged someone based on a job title instead of who they were. I confused position with value. I confused visibility with importance. Employees exchanged glances. Some already understood where this was going. Others did not. Claire looked toward the back of the auditorium. Ethan, would you please join me? A wave of whispers moved through the room as Ethan slowly walked forward. He looked uncomfortable standing beneath the spotlight. The applause began softly, then spread, then grew louder. Ethan lowered his eyes, clearly wishing the attention would pass. Claire waited until the room settled. Most of you know Ethan as a janitor, she said. What many of you do not know is that he helped save this company during one of the most difficult moments in our history. But that is not why he is standing here. She paused. He is standing here because every day he reminds us what leadership actually looks like. The room became still. Claire's voice softened. Leadership is not about power. It is not about titles. It is not about who sits in the corner office. It is about service, respect, humility, and helping others when nobody is watching. Ethan looked down at the stage floor. Claire turned toward him. I owe you an apology. A public one. I was wrong about you. The auditorium fell silent. Not awkward silence. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind of silence that arrives when truth finally enters the room. Ethan smiled gently. Thank you, Claire. Nothing more. No speech. No bitterness. No desire to prove a point. Just grace. Claire handed him a small plaque recognizing his contributions. Ethan accepted it politely. Then he stepped toward the microphone. Hundreds waited to hear what a genius might say. Ethan looked across the room and spotted Lily sitting beside several employees who had invited her to attend. Her proud smile warmed his heart. Then he spoke. A person's value is not determined by the badge they wear. It is determined by the character they carry. Silence followed. Complete silence. Some employees lowered their eyes. Others nodded quietly. Claire felt tears gathering despite her efforts to remain composed. In that moment, nobody cared about job titles. Nobody cared about status. They cared about truth. Months later, Ethan remained exactly who he had always been. A devoted father. A kind man. A quiet source of wisdom. Claire remained CEO, but she led differently now. With more humility, more compassion, more respect. And whenever new employees asked about the plaque displayed near the lobby entrance, they learned a simple lesson that became part of the company's culture forever. Never underestimate a person because of where they stand today. You never know the story they carry, the sacrifices they have made, or the quiet strength that helped them keep moving forward. Sometimes the greatest people in the room are the ones nobody notices until it is finally time for the truth to be seen.